Sometimes good is the enemy of the great. And since we're so comfortable right now, we're thinking that we're doing good. But unfortunately, it's going to give us no opportunities to ever become great. So today's conversation, we're going to be talking about the FBI. And as far as black people are concerned, the FBI should stand for forget about impeachment. Let's get it. Uhuru na nguvu.
No. You're looking at a free black man.
Talk Black 360.
You want to know what a free black man look like? Look at him.
Uhuru na nguvu. Welcome to another dose of Talk Black 360. I am your host, Tino Blaine King, the Kool-Aid Kush, the pioneer of black pragmatism. I've got an awesome show lined up for you today. As I told you earlier, forget about impeachment. And one of the things that I want to bring up in this particular podcast is the fact that we're probably on the wrong side of this argument. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that we should be for Trump, because the reality is in either a year or 6 years, 5 years, Trump is going to be history. We're no longer going to be talking about Trump. But the remnants of what's taking place today is still going to be on our plate, and we're still going to have to deal with it as a people. So the way that this particular case or impeachment trial is laying out, I found it very strange that it has put us on the side of an organization that has never meant us any good. And one of the things that I want you to understand is that our ancestors teaches us that we should always be mindful of our past. As a matter of fact, I've got a proverb to share with you. The proverb says, "Until lions have their historians, tales of the hunt shall always glorify the hunter." And the reason I'm bringing this up is because there's also a saying that goes, or until you learn your history, you will be doomed to repeat it. So let's jump into this conversation right now, and then you'll get a little bit better of an idea of what I'm talking about. So this whole story starts in Chicago. Let's take a look. The good warm-up, that's what it is. We're about to get ready to get into it, you can tell. So at the end of the clip, you heard him. You can still be recognized. So I don't know where we are in our thought process that is making us believe that there's ever a situation where race is not going to be a factor in this country. So let's just continue to unfold this. I'm bringing this up. Put it in the back of your mind that we're talking about Chicago. That's where we're starting at. Now, I want to put this in proper context, because remember, the title of this conversation is Forget About Impeachment. We're worrying about the wrong thing, and it's time for us to get refocused. So let's take a look at what the Senator Lindsey Graham had to say about not particularly the impeachment trial, but he was talking about the dealings and the behavior of the FBI. And this is something that you need to pay close attention to. And this comes from the IG Horowitz report. But take a look.
So James Comey has done more damage to the FBI than anybody since J. Edgar Hoover. McCabe is in that category. Christopher Wray, if you're watching television, you got a mountain to climb. You got to come to the Judiciary Committee and prove to us that you're going to change the culture at the FBI. Some people need to be fired, and some people need to go to jail for what they did, because the FBI and the Department of Justice took the law in their own hands. They defrauded the FISA court. They trampled on the rights of Carter Page, constitutional rights of American citizens, and they surveilled Donald Trump in his campaign, in my view, unlawfully for a very long period of time. The day of reckoning is coming. It's not here yet.
All right. So now you figured out that I've snuck a little wordplay into this conversation. So we're actually talking about the Federal Bureau of Investigations. We are talking about the FBI. And the reason I'm saying that is because right now, by some strange occurrence, we have gotten ourselves put into a situation where, in order to impeach someone that the majority of black people feel very strongly about, someone who we feel is a racist, and rightfully and very possibly so. We are putting ourselves from that hate, we're putting ourselves in a situation where we're making ourselves more vulnerable to the history that this country has showed us that it is capable of. So I want you to pay very close attention to this podcast. I'm not talking about history. I am talking about current affairs, but our history has put us in the place that we are in. So keep paying attention, and I'm sure you're going to get something interesting out of this.
Now, COINTELPRO agents penned fake letters intended to ignite conflict between the Panthers and the Blackstone Nation.
Okay, an environment in the 60s where black people attempting to come out of poverty, attempting to be looked at as citizens, just like the white counterparts, and there's a spirit of unity that is coming across us, and we're starting to realize that all of the promises and all of the things that we were fighting for going through the late 40s and the 50s were coming to a head. Some things that we thought was going to change everything was no longer considered to be a reality. And now what we're doing is we're looking at the same situation. So black people are starting to wake up to the reality that we are walking into a burning house. And from that, something begins to develop, and it begins to develop with the FBI because they see unity amongst black people in the 60s. So you've got the Nation of Islam, you've got Martin Luther King, you've got the Black Panthers, you've got street gangs like the Peace Stone Rangers. You've also got the Pan-Africanist movement. You've got Black liberation theology, which also finds its roots in Chicago. Remember, you had Reverend Wright, and they talked about Reverend Wright being someone who was influencing President Obama. Keep all of this in mind because it's all relative. Now, remember, Reverend Wright went to seminary in Chicago. So all of this is going to play a part in the scenario that we're building up here. And look, we're not talking about 100 years ago. We're not talking about 200 years ago. And when people start saying, oh, slavery is old, get over it. We're talking about 50 or so years ago, where many of you have parents or grandparents or may even have been alive during the time frame that we're talking about. So pay attention because this gets a little bit complicated, but if you watch it, you can see it for exactly what it is. So let's see what happens now. You've got that unity coming around, and you've got one of the most vocal African Americans known in the history of our civil rights and liberation movement, who is speaking, but he's being radicalized by not just the events that's taking place, but by other black leaders. So in 66, MLK met with Elijah Muhammad, and he began to become more radicalized. But take a look.
Vote don't get us a future here. The United States of America is owned by white people. It is white people who make the laws for America because they are the owners of America. We are not the owners of America. We are only slaves or servants of those who own America. We have come to the point or time where that we must unite together and go for our own self and stop laying at the doorsteps of the white man begging him to carry us. He's telling us in all of his actions. Negroes, do something for yourselves.
Now, from that clip, you see that things are getting a little serious, and the Reverend is getting radicalized, and his conversations are also starting to reflect that radical mindset that's coming about. So remember, the whole concept here is the historians are telling you their history. They're not telling you the true history of Brother Malcolm and what led, with Brother Martin and what led up to his assassination. So keeping in line with this situation that we're talking about, you have all of these black organizations that are becoming conscious of the games that that white folks are playing. And not only are you having these black organizations rise up, but keep in mind when black people are unified, everyone, the world over takes notice. So you've got the black organizations getting unified and radicalizing, and then you've also got young white kids, college students, who are also paying attention to what is going on with the black community. And I'll give you a little bit more information on that in just a second. But let's just keep all of that in mind as we move forward. So Martin Luther King begins to get radicalized. He has a conversation with Elijah Muhammad. They don't necessarily leave exchanging ideas and bonding, but you can tell from later speeches that Martin is beginning to develop a more sensible scenario of the relationships of blacks and whites. So let's take a look at what happens next.
Now, the other thing that we've got to come to see now that many of us didn't see too well during the last 10 years, that is that racism is still alive in American society and much more widespread than we realize. In the final analysis, racism is evil because its ultimate logic is genocide. Hitler was a sick and tragic man who carried racism to its logical conclusion. And he ended up leading a nation to the point of killing about 6 million Jews. And this is the tragedy of racism because its ultimate logic is genocide.
So there it is. It's building up. You've just compared racism to genocide, and you know what happened in the history of genocide. And when we talk about Hitler and the Jews, very, very sensitive topic. But let's keep watching as the conversation develops.
And in the North, the Negro sees only retrogress, and he doesn't find it as easy to get his vision centered on his target, the target of opposition, as he does in the South. Consequently, this is made for despair and at many points cynicism, a feeling that you can't win, and it simply means that we've got to develop in the North a massive job of organization and mobilizing forces and resources to deal with the problem in the urban ghettos of the North, just as we've done it in the South.
So you've already been an instrumental figure in the South, and many had left the South in seek of opportunity because now, the playing fields were supposed to be even, and we're starting to realize very shortly thereafter that that's not the case. And we're looking for unity, and we're mobilizing. And this man, who has not only the ear of black people, but he also has the ear of young whites, is talking about mobilizing and going north. On top of all of that, not only do you have the United States not the United States, but the African American in the United States mobilizing. You have the world looking in on what's going on. And since Martin had become a associate, if you will, of the Nation of Islam, there wasn't necessarily the strife that the historians tend to tell us that there was. And this unity attracts outsiders to begin to look at this situation, and it even attracts the attention of an African dictator by the name of. So it's not that hard to figure out. For the United States, this is becoming a problem, which brings me back to the FBI. Now you've got a scenario where unity, the consciousness of the people is starting to arise. Everything is going in the favor of our people. And then we realize that the unity and the advancement of the Black agenda becomes the biggest threat of the United States. And then the FBI is initiated. So take a look.
This is an anonymous letter sent by the FBI to Martin Luther King, urging him to commit suicide. He was one of the primary targets for the FBI's illegal surveillance program in the 60s called COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program which targeted many civil rights groups, such as the Black Panthers and the American Indian Movement, and activists like Stokely Carmichael and Malcolm X for more than a decade. The purpose was to, quote, expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, and otherwise neutralize the possible threats against the existing order.
All right, so pay attention, because the next couple things that I'm going to give you is going to go kind of quick. But you got COINTELPRO, the FBI is activated, and they want to disrupt this movement. So then, okay, so it begins, and Fred Hampton is one of many. The Black Panthers was targeted. Many Black Panthers arrested, killed. Jeff Fort of the Peastone Rangers, who they said was 1,000 strong at Hampton's funeral. They were immobilized. The inner group of, at the time, the Black Peastone Rangers was dismantled, and Jeff Fort was sentenced to 80 years in prison. MLK was killed in 68. Malcolm X was killed in 65. Countless numbers of other activists were either put to rest or they were brought into the fold of oppression. What do I mean? I mean, now you have the country figuring other ways to immobilize or to neutralize this movement. So in a lot of the FBI's in their counterintelligence program, they're identifying people who strangely or oddly enough end up being politicians. As a matter of fact, I believe maybe 4 or more politicians who were involved with the Panther parties and who Panther Party and who were a part of this movement and this energy of Black unity, if you will, are now members of Congress. In the some of them are in the CBC, and of course, in time, that the concept of the CBC has changed drastically. But you see, I'm laying this out because now, as Graham said, the FBI is doing what the FBI normally does. And what we're doing is we're aligning ourselves in an argument that I say has absolutely nothing to do with us, if they impeach them or they don't. But with having said that, we have to understand that the FBI is still a component that will be mobilized and works against Black people. It is our history and we know it, and we can tell this story, and we have the evidence and the proof to show it. And to be even more specific, race, as I said, always has and always will play a significant part in the United States of America. So when my fellow brothers and sisters tell me, tamp down, Tino, calm down, you're talking about stuff that happened 100 years ago, I just gotta say, you're just not taking the lessons that we've learned from history. And just to prove that it's still not the same, there's always a racial component. Let's take a look at what happened, because I've told you about all of the blacks that were killed in that FBI investigation and throughout those 8 to 10 years of a time frame when they were neutralizing our efforts of unity. But remember, we also ignited energies inside of white America. And let's see how impactful and what was the consequence from that impact. Okay, in that clip she said El Rukins. El Rukins was just the evolution of the Black Pea Stone Rangers, just so you know. But I put that in there because she's talking about surveillance, all the vans lined up. You don't have to do that anymore. Remember, we're in the technology age. So they're now, the FBI and that we're talking about right now has the ability to surveil or spy on us or any of our movements. So let's look at the difference in the way that they dealt with the black activists who came out of the 60s. But let's look at what happens to the white folks who were ignited out of the injustices that was carried out against black people. Take a look.
The FBI said the Weather Underground organization, which took credit for the bombing, is the same radical group which was responsible for the bombing of the U.S. Capitol in 1971 and the Pentagon in 1972. But federal officials don't really know much about the group, which is believed to have between 20 and 30 members.
My name is Bernadine Dorn, and I was part of the Weather Underground from, well, it's hard to say when it started, 1970 to 1980.
There's no way to be committed to nonviolence in the middle of the most violent society that history's ever created.
I'm a teacher now in a community college, and
this system is going to be overthrown. It's going to mean a fight, and it's going to mean a lot of white people risking a lot of things when they finally join on the side of the black people.
I mean, there were armed robberies. There were all armed robberies, terrorism. You know, there's all kinds of things that went down that were illegal. So I tell you that we did them, but I'm not going to tell you which ones I did.
Yes, indeed. So okay. So racism is a thing, right? But keep in mind, I'm just giving it to you. I'm giving it to you the way that it is. So with two things we can glean from that. These white folks who was bombing buildings and had waged war on the United States of America, they're still here to tell their story. They're teachers, they're they're politicians, they're activists, and they're still alive. However, when you look at that in comparison to the black folks who did much, much less, we know what that story is. They're not here to tell it. But I just want to make sure that I bring this home for you. And I'm not making any insinuations. But I mean, it's out there. And if sometimes things just add up and they're relative, doesn't mean they're related. But I just want to end this story for you properly. I want you to keep in mind that we started in Chicago. And what do we get out of Chicago other than all of this unity? We got Barack Obama, right? But remember, around midway of this podcast, I said someone who came from outside of this country who attached themselves to us was the assassinated, the deceased Muammar Gaddafi. He was killed in 2011, and during that time, the president was Barack Obama. Oddly enough, Barack Obama was a senator from nowhere other than Chicago. Call it conspiracy, call it whatever you want. I'm just putting the information out there because we need to be our own historians. But you know how we do it. Until the next time, stay strong and stay black. Ashe? This has been another dose of Talk Black 360.
No. You will never be enslaved again by no man.